The dirt under Penelope Zimmerman's fingernails was still fresh from her mother's burial when she returned to the gravesite 3 days later, carrying a basket filled with seeds, a small spade, and a determination that burned fiercer than the Texas sun beating down on Llano in the summer of 1876. At 22 years old, she had buried both parents within 3 years, and the loneliness threatened to swallow her whole if she did not find some way to keep her mother's memory alive in more than just prayers and tears. The cemetery sat on a small hill overlooking the town, where mesquite trees provided sparse shade and the wind carried the scent of prairie grass and dust. Penelope knelt beside the simple wooden cross that marked where her mother, Sarah Zimmerman, had been laid to rest. The earth was still settled unevenly, and she placed her palm flat against it, feeling the warmth seep through her black mourning dress. "I am going to plant you a garden, Mama," she whispered, her voice catching. "You always wanted one, but we never had the time or the money. You will have one now." She had brought wildflower seeds, collected from the fields beyond town where her mother used to take her as a child. Indian paintbrush, bluebonnets, black-eyed Susans, and Mexican hat flowers. Her mother had loved color, had loved life, even when life had been relentlessly hard on her. Penelope wanted this patch of earth to burst with blooms, to be a testament to the woman who had raised her alone after her father died in a ranch accident. The first bite of the spade into the earth was harder than she expected. The ground was packed solid, baked by the relentless Texas heat. Sweat began to bead on her forehead within minutes, and her arms, unused to this kind of labor, protested. She had been working as a seamstress in town since she was 16, spending her days bent over needle and thread, not wielding garden tools. "You look like you are fixing to start a war with that dirt." The voice startled her so badly she nearly dropped the spade. She whirled around to find a man standing a few feet away, his hat tilted back on his head, revealing sun-bronzed features and eyes the color of creek water in summer. He was tall, with broad shoulders that spoke of physical work, and he wore the dusty clothes of a working cowboy, complete with worn leather chaps and a bandana around his neck. "I apologize, miss. Did not mean to frighten you," he said, pulling his hat from his head respectfully. "I was visiting my brother's grave yonder when I noticed you struggling." Penelope straightened, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand. "I am not struggling. I am planting a garden. In this heat, in this hard-packed earth." He walked closer, and she could see the genuine concern in his expression. "Begging your pardon, but that is going to take more than determination and a small spade." "Then I will work harder," she said, turning back to her task. She did not want charity or pity. She had received enough of both in the past week to last a lifetime. She heard him move away and thought he had taken the hint, but moments later, he returned with a pickaxe and a proper shovel. Without asking permission, he drove the pickaxe into the ground near the grave, breaking up the compacted soil with practiced efficiency. "What are you doing?" Penelope demanded, though part of her was grateful. "Helping." He worked as he spoke, his movements economical and skilled. "Name is Jackson Vaughn. Folks call me Jack. I work at the Double R Ranch about 5 miles west of town." "I did not ask for your help, Mr. Vaughn." "No, you did not. But your mother would probably appreciate having her garden sooner rather than later, and at the rate you were going, we would be looking at Christmas before you got those seeds in the ground." He glanced at her, and his expression softened. "I lost my brother 2 months back, thrown from a horse. I understand wanting to do something for them, something that matters." The kindness in his voice nearly undid her. Penelope blinked back tears and nodded. She loved flowers. "We never had a proper home long enough to plant any. Then let us give her a garden worth remembering." They worked together in silence for a while, Jack breaking up the hard earth while Penelope followed behind, using the spade to shape and smooth the soil. The sun climbed higher, and the heat became oppressive, but neither of them stopped. There was something meditative about the work, something that made the grief feel less suffocating. "What kind of flowers are you planting?" Jack asked after nearly an hour of work. "Wildflowers, the ones that grow out in the meadows. Mama used to take me walking there when I was small." Penelope paused, resting on the spade handle. "She would tell me the names of each one, and we would pick bouquets to bring home. They never lasted long in our little room above the general store, but for a few days it felt like we had something beautiful." Jack nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Wildflowers are hardy, they will do well here." "I hope so, I need them to grow." She said it quietly, almost to herself, but he heard. "They will, we will make sure of it." By midday, they had prepared a plot of earth about 6 feet long and 3 feet wide, positioned just at the head of the grave. The soil was loose and ready, and Penelope carefully opened each paper packet of seeds, sprinkling them in sections as her mother had taught her years ago. "You need to water them," Jack said, looking around. "There is a creek about a quarter-mile that way. I can bring water. You have already done so much, and I am offering to do a bit more. Wait here." He returned 20 minutes later with 2 full buckets of water, which they carefully poured over the newly seeded earth. The ground drank it thirstily, and Penelope felt a small flutter of hope in her chest. "I will come back tomorrow to water again," Jack said. Seeds need consistent moisture to sprout, especially in this heat. "Mr. Vaughn, I cannot ask you to do that." "You are not asking, I am offering." He settled his hat back on his head. "I come by to visit my brother most days anyway. It is no trouble to bring water." Penelope studied him for a long moment. He had a good face, honest and open, with smile lines around his eyes despite the sorrow she could see lurking there. "Why are you being so kind?" Jack looked down at the freshly watered earth, then back at her. "Because someone was kind to me when my brother died, and I figure that is how goodness survives in this world. We pass it along." True to his word, Jack returned the next day with water, and the day after that. By the 4th day, Penelope began arriving at the same time he did, and they would water the grave together, talking quietly about small things. He told her about working cattle, about the endless sky during night watches, about the simple satisfaction of honest work. She told him about her sewing, about the ladies in town who came to her for dress alterations, about her dreams of maybe having her own shop one day. On the 7th day, as they were walking back toward town together, Jack said, "There is a church social next Sunday. Would you consider coming with me?" Penelope felt her heart skip. "Mr. Vaughn, I am in mourning. I know. And I am not suggesting anything improper, but grief can swallow a person whole if they are not careful. Sometimes, being around living folks, hearing music and laughter, it helps remind us that life continues." He paused, then added gently, "I think your mother would want you to live, Miss Zimmerman, not just exist." She was silent for a long moment, watching the way the evening light painted the buildings of Lano in shades of gold. "She would have liked you. Then come to the social, as friends, nothing more unless you want there to be." "All right," Penelope heard herself say, "as friends." The church social was held in the open space behind the white clapboard church, with tables laden with food and lanterns strung between posts, casting warm light as the sun set. Penelope wore a gray dress, the most cheerful thing she owned that was still appropriate for mourning, and she had allowed herself a small purple ribbon at her collar, her mother's favorite color. Jack was waiting for her at the edge of the gathering, dressed in clean clothes, his hair combed back and his hat in his hands. "You look lovely, Miss Zimmerman." "Penelope," she said, If we are friends, you should call me Penelope. Penelope, he repeated and smiled. Then you must call me Jack. The evening passed in a blur of introductions and polite conversations. Many people in Lano knew her from her sewing work, and they expressed their condolences about her mother. Some were genuinely kind, while others were merely performing social obligation, but Penelope appreciated all of it. It meant her mother had not passed unnoticed from this world. When the music started, a fiddler and a guitar player striking up a lively tune, Jack offered his hand. "Would you dance with me?" "I should not. It would not be proper." "One dance," he said. "A slow one. Your mother is not here to see, and God knows grief well enough to forgive a moment of joy." She took his hand. They danced at the edge of the gathering, where the light was softer and fewer eyes could judge. Jack held her respectfully, maintaining proper distance, but there was something in the way he looked at her that made Penelope's breath catch. It was not pity or obligation. It was interest, genuine and warm. "Thank you," she said quietly as they swayed to the music. "For the garden, for the water, for this." "Thank you for letting me help," Jack replied. "I have felt more like myself these past weeks than I have since my brother died." Grief is lonely, but it is less lonely when shared, even if we are grieving different people. "Your brother, what was he like?" Jack's expression grew wistful. "Jeremy was 2 years younger than me, all wild energy and big dreams. He wanted to have his own ranch someday, raise the finest horses in Texas. He was breaking a stallion when it happened. The horse reared, Jeremy fell wrong, broke his neck. He died instantly." His voice roughened. "I was grateful for that at least, that he did not suffer." "I am sorry," Penelope said, and meant it deeply. "Your mother, was she ill long?" 6 months. A sickness in her lungs that just got worse and worse. By the end, she could barely breathe. Penelope's eyes stung with tears. "I sat with her every night, and she would tell me stories about when she was young, about when she met my father, about all the places she wanted to see but never got to. She made me promise I would not give up on living just because she was gone." She sounds like a wise woman. "She was the best person I have ever known." They danced another song, then another, and when the evening ended, Jack walked her home to the small room she rented above the millinery shop. At her door, he said, "May I call on you again?" Properly this time, Penelope knew she should say no. She was in mourning. It had only been 2 weeks since her mother's death, but something in her heart, some part that her mother had nurtured toward life and hope, whispered yes. "You may," she said. Over the following weeks, Jack became a constant in her life. He continued to water the grave garden every day, and slowly, miraculously, tiny green shoots began to push through the earth. The first time Penelope saw them, she burst into tears right there in the cemetery, and Jack held her while she cried, understanding that they were tears of both sorrow and relief. "She is still here," Penelope whispered against his shoulder. "In the flowers, in the earth, she is still here." "She is in you too," Jack said gently. "In your kindness and your strength, in the way you keep going even when it is hard." They began spending more time together beyond the cemetery visits. Jack would come by on Sunday afternoons, his one day off from the ranch, and they would walk along the Lano River, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about growing up in Tennessee, about coming west with his brother to find work and adventure. She told him about her childhood memories, about her father's death when she was 19, about learning to sew out of necessity and discovering she loved it. "I want to open my own dress shop someday," she confided one afternoon as they sat beneath a cottonwood tree, watching the river flow past. "Not just alterations, but making original dresses, beautiful things. Mama always said I had an eye for design." "You should do it," Jack said. A woman like you, with your skill and determination, you could build something real. It takes money to start a business. Money I do not have. Then we will find a way. If it is your dream, Penelope, it is worth pursuing. The way he said, we made her heart flutter. As if her dreams were his dreams, as if they were already building a future together. By late summer, the garden on her mother's grave was in full bloom. Indian paintbrush blazed red and orange. Bluebonnets created pools of purple blue. Black-eyed Susans lifted their cheerful yellow faces to the sun. And Mexican hat flowers swayed in the breeze like tiny dancers. It was glorious, a riot of color and life that drew comments from everyone who visited the cemetery. Your mother's garden is the talk of the town, the Reverend told Penelope one Sunday after church. Several people have asked me about planting gardens for their own loved ones. Penelope felt a surge of pride and sorrow mingled together. Mama would have loved that. She always believed beauty should be shared. Jack was waiting for her outside the church, as he did most Sundays now. They had fallen into an easy pattern, a courtship that was proper but unmistakably deepening into something more significant. He took her hand as they walked toward the cemetery for their daily visit to water the garden, a gesture that no longer felt presumptuous but natural. Right. I need to tell you something, Jack said as they stood beside the flowering grave. The foreman at the Double R is retiring next month. The owner has offered me the position. Jack, that is wonderful. Penelope turned to him, genuinely delighted. You will be excellent at it. It comes with a house, he continued, and there was something nervous in his voice now. A small one but sturdy. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a porch, and the pay is significantly better than what I make now. Penelope's heart began to race because she could sense where this was going. Jack took both her hands in his, right there beside her mother's grave, surrounded by blooms. Penelope Zimmerman, I know we have only known each other a few months. I know it might seem too soon, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. You have brought light back into my days. You have given me a reason to wake up smiling. I love you and I want to build a life with you. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but they were not tears of grief this time. I love you too, she whispered. So much it frightens me. Then marry me. Come live with me at the ranch. Bring your sewing, start your business. We will build that future together, the one we have been talking about. Say yes, Penelope. Please say yes. She looked down at her mother's grave, at the flowers dancing in the breeze, and she felt something like a benediction, like permission granted from beyond. Her mother would want this for her. Her mother had made her promise to live. Yes, she said. Yes, I will marry you. Jack pulled her into his arms and kissed her, gentle and sweet, a promise sealed. When they broke apart, both of them were crying and laughing at the same time, overwhelmed by joy and hope. They were married 6 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church, with half the town in attendance. Penelope wore a dress she had made herself. Ivory silk with lace at the collar and cuffs, the most beautiful thing she had ever created. Jack wore a new suit, and when he saw her walking down the aisle, the look on his face made her feel like the most precious woman in the world. After the ceremony, they went directly to the cemetery, still in their wedding clothes, and stood beside her mother's grave. Mama, I married him, Penelope said softly, her hand clasped in Jack's. He is a good man, the kind you always hoped I would find. Thank you for the garden. Thank you for bringing him to me. Jack bent and picked a small bouquet of wildflowers from the grave, handing them to his new wife. Your mother gave us her blessing through these blooms. I will spend every day of my life making sure I deserve you. They moved into the foreman's house at the Double R Ranch the following week. It was small, as Jack had said, but it was clean and sturdy, with windows that let in good light and a porch where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sun set over the rolling Texas hills. Penelope set up her sewing in one of the bedrooms, and within a month, word had spread that she was taking commissions. Women began coming from Llano and even from neighboring towns, asking for dresses, shirts for their husbands, quilts for their babies. Jack proved to be an excellent foreman. He was fair with the ranch hands, skilled with the cattle, and respected by the owner. The ranch prospered under his management, and their life settled into a rhythm that felt both comfortable and exciting. They worked hard during the day and spent their evenings together, talking, laughing, planning their future. Every week, without fail, they rode into town to tend her mother's garden. Jack had installed a rain barrel near the cemetery, and they kept it filled so watering was easier. The garden continued to thrive, a living memorial that required care and attention. Just like their love, in the winter of their first year of marriage, Penelope discovered she was expecting a child. The news filled her with equal parts joy and terror. Her own mother had died too young, had never met grandchildren. The grief of that loss hit her anew. She would have been so happy, Penelope sobbed in Jack's arms one evening. She always wanted to be a grandmother. Then we will tell our child all about her, Jack said firmly. Every story you remember, every lesson she taught you, we will pass it on. She will live through us, through our family. Their son was born in late summer of 1877, during the hottest week of the year. The labor was long and difficult, but when Penelope finally held her baby boy in her arms, she felt a love so fierce it took her breath away. He had dark hair like his father and her mother's bright blue eyes. What should we name him? Jack asked, his voice rough with emotion as he cradled both his wife and son. Samuel, Penelope said, after my father, and his middle name should be Jeremy after your brother. Samuel Jeremy Vaughn, Jack repeated and smiled through his tears. It is perfect. They would both be honored. As Samuel grew from infant to toddler, the little house rang with laughter and life. Penelope's sewing business continued to grow, and she began to save money for the shop she still dreamed of opening. Jack was promoted again, given a share in the ranch's profits, and they were able to build an addition onto the house, giving Penelope a proper workroom and Samuel his own bedroom. They visited the garden every week, bringing Samuel with them as soon as he was old enough to walk. Penelope would tell him about his grandmother, about the woman who had loved wildflowers and beauty in life. Samuel would toddle among the blooms, picking petals and laughing at butterflies, and Penelope would feel the circle of life continuing, generation to generation. In the spring of 1880, Penelope opened her dress shop in Llano. It was a small storefront on Main Street, with a sign painted in elegant script that read, Zimmerman Designs. She kept her maiden name for the business as a tribute to her mother. The shop was everything she had dreamed of. She designed and created custom dresses, from simple work dresses to elaborate ball gowns for the wealthy ranchers' wives who lived in the area. Her reputation spread, and soon women were ordering from her through the mail, sending measurements and fabric preferences, trusting her artistic vision. Jack was her biggest supporter, helping her manage the business side of things, keeping the books, making deliveries. In the evenings after Samuel was in bed, they would sit together at the kitchen table, planning and dreaming, building their life brick by brick. You ever regret it? Penelope asked him one night. Marrying so young, taking on a wife and child when you could have had more freedom. Jack looked at her with such genuine confusion that she almost laughed. Regret you? Penelope, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. You and Samuel, this life we have built, it is everything I never knew I wanted. I thank God every day for that garden, for bringing us together. I love you so much, she whispered. I love you more, he replied, pulling her into his arms. Every single day I love you more than the day before. In 1882, they had a daughter, Rose Sarah Vaughn, named for the flowers her grandmother had loved and for the grandmother herself. She was born with red gold hair and a temperament as fiery as her coloring, and from the moment she arrived, she had her father wrapped around her tiny finger. Samuel, now 5 years old, was initially skeptical about having a sister, but within weeks, he had appointed himself her protector. He would sit beside her cradle for hours, telling her stories and showing her his treasures, rocks and feathers, and whatever else a 5-year-old boy found fascinating. The garden on Sarah's grave continued to flourish year after year. Penelope had learned which flowers did best in each season, and she rotated her planting so there were always blooms, always color, always life. Other graves in the cemetery began to have gardens as well, inspired by what she had started, and the once barren hillside became a place of beauty. On the 10th anniversary of her mother's death, Penelope stood beside the grave with her entire family. Samuel was 8, tall for his age and serious like his father. Rose was 3, dancing among the flowers in a dress Penelope had made for her, butter yellow with white lace. Jack stood beside her, his arm around her waist, silver beginning to thread through his dark hair. "Mama, your great-grandchildren are here," Penelope said softly, though she was addressing the earth. "They are beautiful and healthy and so loved. I kept my promise. I lived. I really, truly lived, and it is all because of this garden, because of the man who stopped to help a grieving girl tend her mother's grave." Jack squeezed her waist gently. "She brought us together." "She did," Penelope agreed. "She gave us everything." That evening, as they rode back to the ranch in their wagon, Samuel asked, "Papa, tell us again about how you met Mama." Jack glanced at Penelope and smiled. "Well, son, I was visiting your Uncle Jeremy's grave, and I saw a beautiful young woman trying to dig a garden with a spade that was too small for the job. She looked so determined, so fierce, that I knew I had to help her." "And then what?" Rose asked, though she had heard the story 100 times. "Then I helped her plant the garden, and every day I came back to water it, and every day I fell a little more in love with her. The garden grew, and so did our love, until I could not imagine my life without her." "That is romantic," Samuel said, in the way of 8-year-old boys who were just beginning to understand such things. "It is the truest thing I know," Jack said. "Love is like a garden. You have to tend it, water it, care for it. You cannot just plant it and walk away. You have to show up, even when it is hard, even when the sun is too hot or the ground is too dry. You keep tending it and it will bloom." "Your father is very wise," Penelope said, reaching over to take his hand. "I learned from the best," Jack replied. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Samuel grew into a fine young man, serious and hardworking, with his father's integrity and his mother's artistic eye. He became a skilled carpenter, crafting beautiful furniture that was in high demand throughout the county. Rose remained as spirited as she had been as a toddler, with her grandmother's love of color and beauty. She followed her mother into the dress shop, showing an even greater talent for design. By the time she was 16, her creations were being featured in catalogs that reached as far as Dallas and San Antonio. In 1890, when Penelope was 36 and Jack was 37, they had another child, a surprise that filled them with equal parts joy and trepidation. They were older now, more settled, and neither had expected to start over with an infant. But when their second son was born, healthy and strong with a head full of black hair and lungs that could wake the entire ranch, they fell in love all over again. They named him Thomas William, and from the start, he was different from their other children. Where Samuel had been serious and Rose artistic, Thomas was adventurous, always exploring, always finding trouble. "He is going to give us gray hair," Jack said one evening after rescuing 3-year-old Thomas from the top of the barn, where he had climbed without anyone noticing. "We already have gray hair," Penelope pointed out, laughing. "He is just making sure we stay young at heart." Jack pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "With you, I will always be young at heart." The dress shop continued to thrive. Penelope had hired 2 seamstresses to help with the demand, and Rose essentially ran the day-to-day operations now, allowing Penelope more time to focus on original designs and special commissions. They had expanded twice, taking over the adjacent storefront, and Zimmerman Designs was now the premier dress shop in this part of Texas. Jack had become part owner of the Double R Ranch when the original owner retired. He and 2 other foremen had bought the property together, and under their management, the ranch had doubled in size and profitability. They raised some of the finest cattle in Texas, and Jack's reputation as a fair and skilled rancher had spread throughout the state. Despite their success and growing wealth, they never forgot where they had started. Every week, without fail, they visited Sarah's grave and tended the garden. Their children knew the ritual, understood its importance. It was where their family had begun, where grief had transformed into love, where death had given way to life. In 1895, Samuel married a sweet girl named Catherine, and they gave Penelope and Jack their first grandchild the following year, a boy they named Jacob. Holding her grandson for the first time, Penelope wept. "I wish Mama could see this," she said to Jack. "She would have loved being a great-grandmother." "She does see it," Jack said with conviction, "through you. Every time you hold that baby, every time you pass on the things she taught you, she is here. She never really left, Penelope. You kept her alive through the garden, and now you are keeping her alive through this family we have built." As the new century approached, their lives were full and rich. Rose married a banker from San Antonio, a gentle man named David who adored her spirit and supported her artistic ambitions. They lived in the city, but Rose traveled back to Llano frequently to work on special projects with her mother. Thomas, true to his adventurous nature, became a Texas Ranger at 19, dedicating his life to bringing law and order to the still sometimes wild frontier. Penelope worried about him constantly, but Jack reminded her that every child had to follow their own path. "We raised him to be brave and good," Jack said. "Now we have to trust him to use those qualities in the world." On a spring evening in 1899, Penelope and Jack sat on their porch, watching the sun set over the ranch they had built together. They were both in their mid-40s now, with silver threading through their hair and lines on their faces that spoke of years of laughter and hard work. But when Jack looked at his wife, he still saw the fierce young woman he had found trying to plant a garden with too small a spade. "Do you remember when we first met?" he asked, taking her hand. "Every detail," Penelope said. "You were wearing a blue shirt and your hat was tilted back. You had dirt on your boots and kindness in your eyes. I took one look at you and knew my life was about to change," Jack said. "I could not have told you how or why, but I knew. You were so determined, so full of love for your mother even in your grief. I wanted to be part of that, to be someone worthy of that kind of devotion." "You have been everything," Penelope said, turning to face him fully. "Everything I needed, everything I hoped for, everything I did not even know to want. You tended that garden with me, and you tended my heart. You helped me heal without rushing me, loved me without demanding I be anything other than myself. You gave me a family, a home, a life beyond anything I imagined possible that day in the cemetery. Jack pulled her close, and they sat together as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. "Your mother would be proud of you," he said. "Of the woman you have become, the business you have built, the family you have raised. You honored her memory in the best possible way." "We honored her," Penelope corrected. "This was never just me, Jack. It was always us." In the early years of the new century, their family continued to grow. Samuel and Catherine had 3 more children. Rose and David had twin girls who inherited their mother's red gold hair and artistic temperament. Thomas, despite his dangerous profession, found love with a schoolteacher named Margaret, and they settled in Austin, where she taught, and he worked to make Texas safer. Through it all, the garden on Sarah Zimmerman's grave continued to bloom. It had become something of a landmark in Llano, a place where people would bring visiting relatives to show them what love and dedication looked like. The wildflowers had spread beyond the original plot, seeding themselves throughout the cemetery, and now the entire hillside blazed with color in spring and summer. Penelope was 52 when she was asked to give a speech at the dedication of the town's new public garden. Standing before the gathered crowd with Jack beside her, she felt the full circle of her life. "My mother never had her own garden," she began, her voice strong and clear. "She loved flowers, loved beauty, loved life, but circumstances never allowed her to have that simple pleasure. When she died, I wanted to give her what she had never had in life. I wanted her to have beauty, to be surrounded by the colors she loved. A kind man stopped to help me plant that garden, and in doing so, he planted hope in my heart. That garden became a symbol of how life persists, how love endures, how beauty can grow even from grief. I hope this public garden will serve the same purpose for all of us, a reminder that we are a community that values beauty, that tends to what matters, that understands the importance of making our corner of the world more lovely." The crowd applauded, and Jack squeezed her hand. Later, as they walked through the new public garden, which featured many of the same wildflowers that grew on her mother's grave, Penelope felt a profound sense of peace. "You ever think about what would have happened if you had not stopped that day?" she asked Jack. "No," he said simply. "Because stopping was inevitable. I believe some things are meant to be, Penelope. We were meant to meet. We were meant to build this life. Your mother's death was a tragedy, but from that tragedy came something beautiful. That is not to say the tragedy was worth it, but it is to say that even in the darkest moments, grace can find us." In 1910, Penelope and Jack celebrated their 34th wedding anniversary. Their children threw them a party at the ranch, with grandchildren running everywhere, filling the house with noise and laughter. Looking around at the gathering, at the family they had created, Penelope felt overwhelmed with gratitude. That evening, after everyone had left, they walked up to the cemetery together, as they had done thousands of times before. The garden was in full bloom, and the evening light made the colors glow. "Thank you, Mama," Penelope said softly, kneeling beside the grave. "Thank you for teaching me about love, about strength, about beauty. Thank you for making me promise to live. I did. I really did." Jack knelt beside her, placing fresh flowers he had cut from their own garden at home beside the grave. "Thank you for raising a daughter who knew how to love well," he said. "Thank you for making her strong enough to survive your loss and brave enough to open her heart to me." They sat together in the fading light, surrounded by blooms, and Penelope rested her head on Jack's shoulder. They had grown old together, had weathered storms and celebrated joys, had built something lasting and true. "You ever regret not having more adventure?" Penelope asked, thinking of all the places they had never traveled, the things they had never done. "This was the adventure," Jack said. loving you, raising our children, building a life from nothing but determination and hope. I would not trade a single day of it for all the adventure in the world." They remained on the ranch until they were both in their 70s, finally retiring when the work became too much for their aging bodies. They moved into a smaller house in town, right on Main Street, where they could walk to the dress shop, which Rose now owned outright, and to the cemetery, where they still tended the garden weekly. Their later years were peaceful, filled with grandchildren and great-grandchildren, with quiet evenings reading together, with memories shared and retold. They had become fixtures in Llano, the couple everyone pointed to as an example of true love, of partnership, of a life well lived. On a spring morning in 1920, Jack had a heart attack in his sleep. He died peacefully with Penelope holding his hand, and his last words were, "Thank you for the garden." The grief was crushing, even though they had been together for 44 years and Penelope was 66 years old. She felt as though half of herself had been torn away. But she did not let the grief consume her, because Jack would not have wanted that. Instead, she channeled it into action. She planted a garden on Jack's grave, right beside her mother's. She used the same wildflowers, the same love and care, and she tended both gardens as she had always done. People in town brought her flowers from their own gardens, wanting to contribute to the memorial of a man who had been respected and loved by the entire community. Samuel, Catherine, Rose, David, Thomas, and Margaret all came home for an extended time after Jack's death, making sure Penelope was not alone. Her grandchildren and great-grandchildren filled the small house with noise and life, reminding her that the legacy she and Jack had built continued. "He was the best man I ever knew," Samuel said one evening as they sat together. "He was my best friend," Rose added, tears streaming down her face. "He taught me what it means to be good," Thomas said quietly. Penelope held her children close, drawing strength from them. "He loved you all so much. Everything he did, every decision he made was with you in mind. He wanted to build something that would last, and he did. You are his legacy, and your children and their children. He will live on through all of us." In the months following Jack's death, Penelope found solace in routine. She went to the cemetery every morning, tending both gardens, talking to both Jack and her mother as if they could hear her. She worked at the dress shop, helping Rose with the business. She spent time with her grandchildren, passing on stories and wisdom. One morning, almost a year after Jack's death, Penelope was at the cemetery when she noticed the first shoots of spring flowers pushing through the earth on Jack's grave. She knelt beside them, tears streaming down her face, but this time they were tears of gratitude rather than grief. "You are still here," she whispered. "In the flowers, in our family, in every good thing we built together. You are still here, and I will tend this garden until the day I join you." Penelope lived another 15 years, staying active and engaged until the very end. She saw grandchildren marry and great-grandchildren born. She saw Rose expand the dress shop into a full department store. She saw Thomas become the head of the Texas Rangers. She saw Samuel's carpentry business become the most successful in the region. She spent her final years writing down the stories of her life, of Jack's life, of their love and their family, wanting to preserve their history for future generations. She filled notebooks with memories, with lessons learned, with advice for how to build a good life. On a warm spring evening in 1935, Penelope Vaughn passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 81. Her children found her in her bed, a smile on her face, clutching a dried bouquet of wildflowers from the garden she had tended for so many years. They buried her beside Jack, with her mother on the other side, and they planted the most spectacular garden Llano had ever seen. Wildflowers from all over Texas were brought in, along with seeds from flowers that had grown on her mother's and Jack's graves over the decades. The plot became a riot of color that lasted most of the year, a testament to a woman who had transformed grief into beauty, who had built a life of meaning from loss. At her funeral, which was attended by hundreds of people, Rose read from her mother's notebooks, sharing the story of how Penelope and Jack had met. My mother wrote, "I went to plant a garden on my mother's grave, expecting only to honor her memory. But a cowboy stopped to help me, and in helping me tend that garden, he tended my heart. From death came life. From grief came love. From a simple act of kindness came a family, a legacy, a lifetime of joy. If I could tell you one thing, it would be this: tend the gardens in your life. Care for what matters. Show up even when it is hard. Love perseveres, but only if we give it water and light. We were gardeners, my Jack and I, tending not just flowers but a life, a family, a love that death itself could not diminish." There was not a dry eye in the church. Samuel, now 75 years old himself, stood at his mother's grave after everyone had left. His own children and grandchildren stood with him, spanning 5 generations. "She would be proud," Catherine said, taking his hand. "Of you, of all of us." "She and Dad built something eternal," Samuel said. "Not just a family, but a way of living. They showed us that love is not passive. It is active. It requires work and dedication and showing up every single day." They tended each other the way they tended those gardens, with care and patience and unwavering commitment. One of his great-grandchildren, a girl of about 8 with Penelope's dark hair and bright eyes, asked, "Can we tend the gardens now, Grandpa?" Samuel smiled through his tears. "Yes, sweetheart. We will tend the gardens. We will always tend the gardens." And they did. Generation after generation, the family made sure the 3 graves with their wildflower gardens were maintained. They became a tradition, a pilgrimage, a way of remembering where they came from and what mattered most. The story of Penelope and Jack became legend in Leno. Young couples would visit the graves on their wedding days, asking for the kind of love that had sustained through decades. Parents would bring their children to teach them about tending what matters. Artists would come to paint the gardens. Writers would come to capture their beauty in words. The house at the Double R Ranch, where Penelope and Jack had raised their children, was preserved as it had been when they lived there. Rose's great-granddaughter turned it into a museum, filling it with Jack's carpentry, with dresses Penelope had designed, with photographs and letters and all the detritus of a life well lived. Visitors would walk through the rooms and feel the love that had filled them. They would sit on the porch where Penelope and Jack had spent countless evenings, and they would understand what it meant to build something that lasted. The dress shop, now called Zimmerman Vaughn Designs to honor both Penelope and Rose, continued to operate well into the 21st century, still creating beautiful clothes, still honoring the artistic vision that had started with a young widow who wanted to make something beautiful. But it was the gardens, always the gardens, that people remembered most. The gardens that had started as one grieving daughter's tribute to her mother had become a symbol of enduring love, of the way beauty could grow from sorrow, of the importance of tending what mattered. On the centennial anniversary of Penelope's death, the family gathered at the cemetery for a special ceremony. There were Vaughns and descendants from all over the country, dozens of people who could trace their lineage back to that day in 1876, when a cowboy had stopped to help a young woman plant a garden. The eldest descendant present, Samuel's granddaughter Elizabeth, now 92 years old, spoke to the gathering. "My great-grandmother Penelope used to tell me that love was like a garden. You could not just plant it and walk away. You had to tend it, water it, pull the weeds, protect it from storms. She and my great-grandfather Jack showed us how to do that. They showed us that true love is not just a feeling but an action, a choice you make every single day. They chose each other every day for 44 years, and in doing so, they created something that has now lasted for more than 150 years. We are that legacy. We are the garden they planted and tended. And it is our responsibility to continue that work, to tend our own gardens, to choose love every single day. She bent, her movements stiff with age, and planted new seeds in the gardens on the 3 graves. Around her, family members did the same, adding to the beauty that had started so long ago. As the sun set over Lano that evening, casting golden light across the cemetery, the gardens glowed with color. Red, orange, yellow, purple, blue, every shade of wildflower blooming in profusion, tended by love across generations. A young couple, newly married and just starting their own journey, stood hand in hand at the edge of the gathering. The woman leaned against her husband's shoulder and said, "I want us to be like them, like Penelope and Jack. I want us to build something that lasts." The man pulled her close and said, "Then we will. We will tend our garden, whatever that looks like. We will choose each other every day. We will build a love that endures." They did not know it yet, but they would return to these graves often over the years, drawing inspiration from the story of the woman who planted a garden on her mother's grave and the cowboy who helped her tend it. They would bring their own children and their grandchildren, and the cycle would continue, because that is what Penelope and Jack had truly created. Not just a family, not just a business or a ranch or beautiful graves. They had created a legacy of love, a template for how to build a life of meaning and beauty. They had shown that grief could transform into growth, that kindness could lead to forever, that the simple act of tending what mattered could create something eternal. The gardens continued to bloom season after season, year after year, century after century. They bloomed through drought and rain, through war and peace, through all the changes that time brought. They bloomed because people continued to tend them, because the lesson Penelope and Jack had taught remained true. Love perseveres when we give it what it needs to grow. And somewhere, in whatever place souls go after death, Penelope stood beside her mother and her Jack, watching the gardens they had planted together continue to bring beauty and hope to the world. They had done well. They had loved well. They had tended what mattered, and because of that, their love would never truly die. It would bloom forever in the hearts of those who heard their story and chose to plant gardens of their own.